Chapultepec, the ancient hill whose name means Grasshopper Hill in the language of the Aztecs, has stood witness to some of the most pivotal moments in Mexico's long history. But in 1847, it became the focal point of one of the most dramatic and decisive battles of the Mexican-American War. The fortress that crowned the hill would be the last line of defense before the gates of Mexico City. The U.S. invasion, which had begun in earnest in 1846, was nearing its end. U.S. General Winfield Scott, the mastermind behind the march from Veracruz to the Mexican heartland, knew that to capture Mexico City, he would first have to take Chapultepec. This would be no easy task, for the fortress was a symbol of Mexican pride and seemingly impregnable defense. The Mexican-American War began in 1846 over a series of territorial disputes between the two nations. The United States, driven by the concept of manifest destiny, sought to expand its borders westward, claiming the lands that Mexico controlled. From California to Texas, the ambitions of the United States clashed with Mexico's sovereignty. General Winfield Scott, tasked with leading the American forces, devised an audacious plan. One that would lead his army to land in the port city of Veracruz and march 260 miles inland, fighting through Mexican defenses to reach the capital. The road to Mexico City was long and perilous, but by September of 1847, Scott's army had arrived at the gates of the capital, with one obstacle still standing in their way: the towering fortress of Chapultepec. Scott knew that taking Chapultepec would not just be a tactical victory, it would be a psychological blow to Mexican resistance. And for the Mexican defenders, losing the fortress meant losing the capital itself. Chapultepec was more than just a fortress. It was a military academy, and the defenders inside were not only seasoned soldiers, but young cadets from Mexico's elite military school. Under the command of General Nicolas Bravo, these soldiers, numbering around 1,000, were Mexico's last hope to stop the American advance. Among these defenders were 6 cadets, who would go on to become immortalized in Mexican history as Los Niños Heroes, the boy heroes. These young men, barely out of adolescence, refused to abandon their posts when the situation grew dire. Their determination and sacrifice would echo throughout Mexican history for generations to come. These cadets, some as young as 13, were armed and ready to defend their country to the last man. Little did they know, they would soon become legends, their names etched into the fabric of Mexico's identity. On the morning of September 12, 1847, General Scott unleashed a ferocious artillery bombardment on the fortress. For an entire day, the walls of Chapultepec were pounded by cannon fire, and smoke filled the air as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. The following day, September 13th, the full assault began. The climb up Chapultepec was not an easy feat. The steep slopes were covered in rocks and brush, and the Mexican defenders, high above, fired relentlessly as the advancing Americans. Yet the U.S. forces pressed on, determined to breach the fortress at any cost. After hours of brutal fighting, the Americans broke through the defenses, scaling the walls and engaging in close-quarter combat. The fighting inside the fortress was desperate, with both sides battling for control of the castle. But mid-afternoon, American soldiers had raised the Star and Stripes above the fortress, signaling the fall of Chapultepec. But while the American victory at Chapultepec was significant, it is the story of Los Niños Hieros that lives on in the hearts of the Mexican people. According to legend, as the last defenders fell, one cadet, Juan Escuta, wrapped himself in the Mexican flag and leapt from the castle walls to avoid capture. Whether fact or myth, the tale of Escuta's sacrifice had become a symbol of the unyielding spirit of Mexican patriotism. Today, the 6 boys, heroes, are commemorated with a national holiday on September 13th, and their legacy as defenders of Mexican sovereignty remains a powerful reminder of the cost of war. For the soldiers of the United States, the Battle of Chapultepec was the culmination of months of hardship, perseverance, and sacrifice. From the coastal landings at Veracruz to the fierce fighting through central Mexico, the U.S. forces had faced daunting challenges. But as they stood at the base of Chapultepec Hill, they knew what this battle would be the final test of their courage and resolve. Leading the American forces was General Winfield Scott, a man whose strategic brilliance and unshakable resolve had brought his army to the gates of Mexico City. But as they prepared to storm the heavily fortified hill, it was the bravery of the individual soldiers and officers that would decide the outcome. Among the American forces was Lieutenant George Pickett, a young officer who had later gained fame during the Civil War. On the steep and unforgiving slopes of Chapultepec Hill, Pickett led his men with remarkable bravery, scaling the walls of the fortress under withering fire. Though faced with near impossible odds, the American forces fought with unwavering courage. Another rising star of the war was Lieutenant Ulysses S. Grant, who would go on to become the commanding general of the Union forces during the American Civil War. At Chapultepec, Grant's quick thinking and fearless leadership helped turn the tide. Under heavy fire, Grant and his men captured the Mexican artillery position and turned the guns on the defenders, forcing them to retreat. Grant's ability to remain calm under fire, even in the heat of battle, foreshadowed the qualities that would later define his leadership. For these soldiers, Chapultepec was not just another battle. It was a proving ground, a crucible that would shape the men who would one day become legends in their own right. The United States Marines, who led the final assault on Chapultepec, fought with tenacity that would go down in history. It is from this battle that the Marine Corps earned their famous line in their hymn, "From the halls of Montezuma." Their bravery, skill, and sacrifice were immortalized in their bloody and decisive victory. For these soldiers, many of whom were merely boys when they first enlisted, the Battle of Chapultepec was the defining moment of their lives. Their heroism under fire not only secured a crucial victory in the Mexican-American War, but cemented their place in the annals of American military history. Though the war would soon come to an end, the legacy of those who fought at Chapultepec would live on in both the United States and Mexico. The battle is remembered not just as a conflict between the two nations, but as a testament of bravery, determination, and the sacrifice of those who fought on both sides. But among these, we must discuss another group. Among the ranks of the Mexican defenders at Chapultepec was a group of men who had taken a unique and perilous journey to be there. They were the St. Patrick's Battalion, Los San Patricios, an unusual regiment comprised of mostly Irish immigrants who had defected from the U.S. Army to fight for Mexico. Led by John Riley, a former artilleryman in the U.S. Army, the San Patricios were largely Irish immigrants who had fled famine and hardship in their homeland seeking opportunity in the United States. But as the war with Mexico dragged on, many of these men began to question their loyalty to the U.S. cause. For the Irish, the sight of Mexico's Catholic churches being bombarded and the mistreatment of Mexican civilians by American forces felt too familiar, a mirror of the oppression they had faced under British rule. Driven by the shared Catholic faith, sympathy for the Mexican people, and disillusionment with the U.S. military, the San Patricios made the fatal decision to desert and join the Mexican army. They fought with valor in several key battles, including the defenses of Monterrey, the siege of Churubusco, but by the time they reached Chapultepec, their numbers had been severely reduced. At Chapultepec, the San Patricios fought to the bitter end, knowing that capture meant almost certain death. Their green banner, emblazoned with the harp and the words Erin go Bra, Ireland forever, fluttered in the wind as they defended the fortress. Yet despite their courage, the outcome was inevitable. Many of the San Patricios were captured during the battle. For these men, their punishment would be as severe as their actions were bold. Most were court-martialed and sentenced to death by hanging, a grim end for men who had fought for a cause they believed in, even as it meant betraying their former comrades. In one of the most infamous acts of the war, the executions were timed to coincide with the raising of the American flag over Chapultepec Castle, forcing the captured San Patricios to witness the final defeat of the fortress they had sworn to defend. Though their story ended in tragedy, the San Patricios are remembered in Mexico City as heroes, men who in their final moments stood firm for a nation they had come to adopt as their own. To this day, they are honored every year on September 12th with a solemn remembrance to their sacrifice. The story of the St. Patrick's Battalion is a reminder that in the war, the lines of loyalty, identity, and faith can blur. Their courage and conviction left a lasting imprint on the history of two nations, forever intertwined, the fates of Ireland, Mexico, and even of the third being the United States. With Chapultepec captured, the road to Mexico City lay wide open. On September 14th, 1847, U.S. troops entered the Mexican capital, effectively ending the war. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in February of 1848, officially ceded vast territories to the United States, land that would eventually become states like California, Arizona, and New Mexico. The consequences of the Mexican-American War would reshape both nations. For the United States, it marked a massive expansion of territory, fulfilling the vision of Manifest Destiny. For Mexico, it was a devastating loss, but one that strengthened the country's resolve to defend itself, its national identity, and independence. Chapultepec Castle stands today as a museum, a place of remembrance and reflection. It is a symbol of both the sacrifices made by those who defended it and the enduring history of a proud nation. The Battle of Chapultepec was not just a military engagement. It was a turning point in the histories of both Mexico and the United States. The bravery of those who fought, the legends that were born, and the consequences that followed have left an undeniable mark on the two nations. Thank you for watching History with Tim. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Battle of Chapultepec, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, consider supporting our National Parks Preservation Fund. Until next time.